In the hush of a forgotten hollow, where the Blue Ridge Mountains clawed at the sky like jagged fingers, there stood a farm long swallowed by time and thorn. The air hung heavy there, thick with the rot of secrets buried deep in the soil, and folks in the nearby town of Harrow's Bend spoke of it only in whispers after dark, when the wind carried echoes that sounded too much like cries. It was the Whitaker place, they called it, though no Whitaker had been seen in generations, not since old Ezekiel nailed shut the doors of that colossal barn back in 1847, boarding them up with iron spikes as if to keep hell itself from spilling out. Or maybe, some said, to keep something worse from getting in. The barn loomed like a sentinel over the weed-choked fields, its weathered planks warped and blackened by endless rains, the roof sagging under the weight of unspoken sins. Vines snaked through cracks in the walls, as if nature itself were trying to strangle the truth hidden within. No bird perched on its eaves, no animal dared graze near its shadow. And on moonless nights, if you listened close, you might hear the faint scrape of nails against wood, or the muffled murmur of voices that weren't quite human anymore. Ezekiel Whitaker had been a man of God, or so he preached to anyone who'd listen in those early days, his eyes burning with a fervor that made the congregation shift uneasily in their pews. He spoke of purity, of blood untainted by the corrupt world beyond his fences. But when his wife birthed only daughters, 5 of them, pale and fragile as porcelain dolls, the madness took root. He saw omens in the stars, heard whispers in the rustle of cornstalks, convincing himself that his line must endure, untouched, unbroken. So he led them into the barn one stormy evening, promising sanctuary from the storms of sin, and sealed the world away. What unfolded in that suffocating darkness over the decades was a descent into a nightmare woven from flesh and folly. Generations blurred into one twisted tapestry, where sisters became mothers, daughters became wives, and the boundaries of humanity frayed like old rope. The air grew foul with the stench of confinement, bodies contorting under the strain of recycled blood, eyes glowing with a feral light in the perpetual gloom. They scratched calendars into the beams, marking births and deaths with trembling hands, their world shrinking to the creak of timbers and the drip of leaks from above. And through it all, a silent scream built in the walls, waiting for the day someone foolish enough would come prying, drawn by the allure of history's hidden horrors. In the dim back room of the county archives in Beckley, West Virginia, a young historian named Clara Voss was killing time on a rainy October afternoon when she tugged open a mildewed ledger marked Unclaimed Estates, 1880 to 1920. Most pages were the usual litany of debts and disappearances, but one entry, scrawled in frantic brown ink, stopped her cold. Whitaker Hollow Farm, Ezekiel Whitaker, December 1879. No heirs located. Property abandoned. Barn sealed by order of owner 1847. Do not open. The handwriting trembled, as though the clerk had been afraid to let the pen linger. Beneath the entry someone had later penciled, in a different hand, still sealed 1903, J. McBride, Surveyor. And then, fainter still, a third note in red, advise against entry. Locals refuse. Clara felt the familiar tug she always chased, the sense that history had tried to bury something and almost succeeded. She cross-referenced the name Whitaker in older tax rolls and found the family had once owned half the valley, then nothing. Church records mentioned Ezekiel preaching fire and brimstone sermons about the seed of the righteous before he abruptly stopped attending services in 1846. After that, only rumors. 5 daughters who never married, never appeared in town, never died on any register. Old newspapers yielded fragments. An 1851 notice begged information about missing females from the Whitaker farm. The sheriff's reply was curt: family states all are well and wish privacy. A traveling preacher's diary, digitized years later by a university, described riding past the farm in 1864 and seeing the barn doors plated with fresh iron, no windows, no smoke from a chimney, yet hearing what sounded like a woman singing inside, low and endless, like a hymn played backward. By the time Clara closed the ledger, dusk had soaked the windows grey. She sat in the humming fluorescent silence, pulse ticking in her ears, already picturing the drive up the forgotten logging road to Whitaker Hollow. Something in those cramped, terrified notations felt alive, the way a fresh bruise feels alive, throbbing under the skin of the past, waiting for the wrong touch to split it open. She didn't yet know that the wrong touch would be hers in the cracked vinyl booth of Della's diner, The last open place on Route 61 before the mountains swallowed the road, Clara nursed a cup of coffee gone cold while three old men at the counter pretended not to watch her. When she finally asked about Whitaker Hollow, the room went so quiet she could hear the grease pop on the griddle. Della herself, 80 if she was a day, wiped her hands on a towel that had once been white and leaned close enough that Clara smelled wintergreen and cigarette smoke. "You the one been poking around the courthouse?" Her voice was soft, almost kind, but the words carried a warning sharp as a straight razor. "Some things get left alone for good reason, honey." The oldest man, called simply Uncle Birch, turned on his stool. His eyes were the pale blue of creek ice, and when he spoke his dentures clicked like dice in a cup. Ezekiel Whitaker had 5 girls. Pretty as morning glories, folks said, back when folks still went calling. Then one spring he come into town with a wagon load of iron spikes long as your arm. Told the blacksmith he was building a storm cellar for his daughters, keep 'em safe from the wrath coming. Paid in gold coin, old Spanish doubloons, wouldn't take paper money. Said the Lord told him the world outside was fixing to burn. Birch paused to suck air through his teeth. That night thunder rolled like artillery. Next morning the barn doors was shut, spikes drove clean through oak planks into the frame. Ezekiel stood out front with a Bible in one hand and a hammer in the other, daring anybody to say different. Nobody did. After that, the girls wasn't never seen again. Not at church, not at market, not even peeking through curtains. Just Ezekiel riding in alone for flour and salt, eyes wilder every year till he dropped dead in his own cornfield. Della reached across and closed Clara's notebook with 2 spotted fingers. "Wind still carries their singing some nights," she whispered. Soft, like babies crying underwater. Clara's headlights crawled up the overgrown ruts until the farm emerged like a corpse half unearthed by floodwater. House collapsed into itself, porch pillars snapped like bones, every window blind with kudzu. But the barn stood untouched, massive, cathedral-sized, its black planks silvered only by moon and rot. The doors were the first wrong thing, oak slabs 6 inches thick, cross-braced with iron straps gone orange with rust, yet the spikes, those impossible, hand-forged spikes, still jutted through the wood exactly as described, heads mushroomed from a single furious hammering in 1847. She walked the perimeter twice with a flashlight, boots sinking in loam that smelled of iron and wet dog. No hinges on the outside, no latch, no padlock. The doors had been sealed from the exterior and never meant to open again. High above, the hayloft opening had been boarded over from within, nails bent inward as if someone inside had tried to keep the night out. Yet the boards were clawed, deep parallel gouges that looked fresh, pale wood shining against the dark. In the county deed room she had found a surveyor's plat from 1903 showing a dotted line around the barn labeled structure condemned entry forbidden by verbal decree of E. Whitaker 1847, still honored. Another memo, dated 1937, from a WPA crew sent to salvage timber. Men refused to approach barn after hearing women's voices inside. Project abandoned. A third, 1968, a state police report after teenagers broke in elsewhere on the property. Juveniles reported scratching sounds from barn, described as fingernails on tin. No follow-up. Clara pressed her palm to the door. The wood was warm, warmer than the night air, pulsing faintly like a vast hide breathing slow. From the narrow gap beneath, where the bottom plank had warped away from the sill, came a smell, milk gone sour, menstrual blood, wet feathers, something coppery and alive. She knelt, shone her light into the blackness, and for an instant saw movement far back, a pale shape unfolding itself from the straw, joints bending wrong, watching her with eyes that caught the beam like an animal's. Then the light trembled in her hand, the shape was gone, but the warmth against her palm increased, as though something on the other side had leaned its weight against the door to feel her heartbeat match its own. Clara found the journal wedged behind a loose foundation stone in the ruined house, its leather cover soft as a tongue and black with mold. The first pages were Ezekiel Whitaker's sermons, tight, furious script quoting Leviticus, Numbers, the apocryphal book of Enoch, but halfway through the ink changed to a rust brown that flaked when she turned the pages. The handwriting loosened, grew childlike, then cramped again as though different hands had taken turns. He wrote that God had appeared to him in a dream of white fire and commanded him to keep the vine unpruned by foreign graft. His wife had borne only daughters, Proof the Lord wanted the blood folded back upon itself, refined like silver 7 times. The world is a kennel of mongrels, he scrawled, but my seed shall remain the elect, undiluted, a living ark against the coming filth. He listed the girls by the order they bled: Abigail, Mercy, Prudence, Chastity, and Little Hope, barely 10 when the doors closed. The entries turned clinical. He paired them as the doves were paired, kept tallies of quickenings and miscarriages, noted which unions produced children with the mark of grace: 6 fingers, snow-white hair, eyes the color of river ice. When his own body failed, he recorded the solution with calm triumph. The strongest daughters would lie with their brothers, then with their sons, the circle tightening like a noose drawn by invisible hands. Purity is pain, he wrote the final time his pen worked, but pain is the whetstone of the soul. Later pages, written by hands that shook with fever or terror, begged forgiveness in languages that weren't quite English anymore. Someone, Mercy, maybe, drew tiny pictures in the margins, a sun with bars across it, a door after door after door. The last coherent line, scratched so deep the quill tore the paper, read, "He told us the outside was dead. We believed him because we had never seen it alive." Beneath that, a single bloody fingerprint, perfectly preserved, as though the book had been waiting under the stone for someone to come and press their own finger beside it. The night Clara chose to return was moonless and windless, the kind of dark that feels deliberate. She parked a quarter-mile down the hollow and walked the rest, boots silent on the pine needles, flashlight off. The barn waited exactly where it had waited for 178 years, but the air around it had thickened, the way it does before lightning that never quite strikes. Somewhere in the tree line an owl called once and did not call again. She circled wide, letting her eyes adjust until the structure separated itself from the greater dark, taller than memory, wider, the ridgeline sagging like the spine of something ancient trying to stand. When she faced the sealed doors again, the warmth was still there, radiating through the planks in slow waves, but now it carried a rhythm, a double pulse that matched the blood in her ears. She told herself it was imagination, her body only answering its own fear. Then came the first sound, a soft click, like a knuckle cracking far inside the barn. It was followed by another, and another, traveling along the wall toward her as though something jointed and patient were feeling its way across the beams. Clara froze. The clicks stopped directly opposite her, inches away on the hidden side of the oak. A long silence stretched, broken only by the wet push of her own breathing. Next came the scrape, slow, deliberate, the drag of a nail across wood, but lower, near the ground, circling. It paused beneath the gap where the bottom plank had warped. She smelled the sour milk sweetness stronger now, threaded with something muskier, almost sexual. A shadow eclipsed the thin blade of starlight under the door, not a shape, exactly, but the absence of one, as though darkness itself had leaned down to study her silhouette. The shadow lingered, breathing. Clara felt the hairs on her arms rise in perfect synchrony, the way iron filings answer a magnet. Whatever was on the other side inhaled when she did, exhaled a half-second later, tasting the air she had just used. Then, soft as a mother hushing a child, came a voice, or the memory of one. 3 notes, tuneless, rising, the same fragment Della had warned her about. It was not outside the barn. It was inside Clara's ribcage, vibrating against bone. The pry bar was old, its curve pitted and black with someone else's sweat, but it bit into the oak like it had been waiting for this moment since the spikes first went in. Clara worked in silence, levering one iron shank at a time, each giving with a sound like a long-held breath finally released. The spikes came free in slow motion, clinking into the weeds like spent teeth. When the last one dropped, the doors sighed apart on their own, a finger width at first, then wider, as though the barn were yawning after a century of sleep. The stench rolled out in a single moist wave, ammonia, spoiled meat, menstrual rags left to rot, and beneath it all the sweet sick smell of milk long turned. It coated her tongue, made her eyes water instantly stream. She gagged once, pressed her sleeve to her face, and stepped over the threshold. Inside was darker than any dark she had ever known, a blackness that seemed to have weight, pressing against her flashlight beam and bending it. The air was warm, body warm, and wet. Straw lay in drifts deep, matted into felt by generations of bare feet. Her light swept across walls and stopped. The planks were covered, floor to ceiling, with claw marks, some shallow and frantic, others carved so deep the wood curled away like apple peel. Higher up, handprints smeared in old blood overlapped in frantic layers, as though dozens of palms had tried to push the walls outward and failed. In the center of the space stood a crude village of stalls and pens built from wagon wheels, bed frames, coffins pried open and reused. Rope beds sagged under the weight of ancient quilts gone the color of bruises. Everywhere hung the remnants of domesticity gone wrong, tiny dresses yellowed to parchment, dolls made of corn husks and human hair, a child's shoe no bigger than her thumb still laced with a ribbon stiff with dried fluids. From the rafters dangled wind chimes fashioned from finger bones threaded on baling wire. When the air from the open doors reached them they clinked together with a sound like ice breaking in a well. And still the smell thickened, growing almost floral in its putrescence, until Clara realized she was breathing through her mouth and tasting it anyway, tasting them, the residue of every birth, every death, every coupling that had happened in this airless womb of wood. The flashlight beam crawled deeper, past the bone chimes and the ruined beds, until it found the far wall and the thing that had been painted there in a medium too thick for paint. A family tree, generations wide, began with Ezekiel's name in proud capitals and then branched inward, tightening like a strangler figure. Each new name was smaller, the letters more cramped, as though the hand that wrote them had less and less strength left. Beside the names were crude portraits, faces growing longer, foreheads sloping, jaws jutting, eyes migrating outward until they stared from the sides of skulls like fish. The last cluster of births, no dates, only tally marks, showed figures with elongated limbs, extra joints, translucent skin through which veins showed black. Below the tree, the floor was paved with bones arranged in careful spirals. Ribs, femurs, tiny bird-like vertebrae of infants laid out like petals. Some still wore scraps of fabric, a calico sleeve, a christening gown no bigger than a handkerchief. The skulls had been placed upright along the baseboard, facing the tree as if in perpetual worship. Many lacked lower jaws, others had too many teeth, crowded and sharp, crowded again by a second incomplete row pushing through the gums like a shark's. Clara's light trembled across a low platform built from church pews dragged inside and lashed together. On it lay the newest skeletons, still articulated by gristle, skin shrunk to leather over impossible frames. One had 6 fingers on each hand, the nails grown into yellow spirals 2 feet long. Another's legs ended in fused hooves glossy as obsidian. Their eye sockets were not empty, something pale and wet gleamed inside, moving slightly when the beam struck it, as though even now the jelly refused to dry. On the wall behind the platform, someone had used charcoal and tallow to scrawl a single sentence repeated until the words overlapped into a black scar. "We are the pure, we are the pure, we are the pure." Beneath it, in a different substance, dried to the color of rust, was added a final line in letters twice as large, "And purity is hungry." The beam lingered there, and in the silence Clara heard the soft pop of a joint somewhere above her in the rafters. As though nothing moved that she could see, the flashlight died without warning, the bulb giving one last sickly pulse before the dark rushed in like floodwater. Clara slapped the switch twice, heard only the dry click of plastic, and then stood blind in the reeking cathedral of bone. A sound answered the darkness, the slow drag of something heavy across straw, coming from the direction of the altar platform. It paused, inhaled through wet passages, exhaled a sigh that stirred the hairs on Clara's forearms. Then movement again, closer, deliberate, the soft pad of bare soles deformed into something wider, longer, spreading weight like a hand missing half its bones. She backed one step and felt her heel come down on something that crunched, a tiny rib cage, still hinged. The thing in the dark answered with a low clicking of tongue against teeth that were too many. It was tasting the air, tasting her fear the way a snake tastes heat. A match flared in her trembling fingers, sulfur blooming blue, and for one heartbeat the barn became a cavern of moving shadows. The creature crouched 10 feet away, knees bent backward, spine curved like a question mark made of gristle. Its skin was the color of candle wax left in sun, stretched so thin the map of veins showed black beneath. Hair hung in wet ropes the length of its body, matted with straw and older things. The face, what had once been a face, tilted toward the match flame, nostrils flaring wide, eyes milk-white but focused, pupils reduced to pinpricks that drank the light and gave nothing back. It had been a woman once. The swollen breasts, the wide hips warped by countless births, told that much. But the mouth had split too far, revealing a second row of teeth still growing, and the arms ended in hands where each finger had subdivided into 3 pale twigs that twitched like insect legs. When it smiled, because it did smile, the expression was almost tender, the way a mother smiles at a child who has finally come home late. The match burned down to Clara's fingers. She dropped it, stomped the ember, and in the new darkness the thing whispered a single word that might have been her name, or might have been hunger, spoken in a voice that still remembered lullabies. The match had shown Clara one more thing before it died, a narrow ladder of pegs hammered into the barn's central post, leading up into the rafters where the air would have been marginally cleaner. She lunged for it, fingers closing on wood slick with generations of hand grease. The creature behind her made a wounded sound, half sob, half laugh, and began to follow, joints popping like green kindling as it rose to its full, impossible height. Halfway up, her palm brushed something soft. She risked the penlight from her pocket, clicked it once. Dozens of small bundles hung from the beams on twine, cloth dolls no bigger than squirrels, stitched from dresses and undergarments, faces worked in careful button eyes and human teeth. Each had a lock of hair sewn where the heart would be. Tags of faded cloth bore names: Abigail, Mercy, Prudence, Hope, then stranger ones: Twice Blessed, Mooncalf, Stillborn Who Breathed. A secret census of the living and the lost. Higher still, the rafters opened into a loft no surveyor had ever mapped. Here the women had built a hidden world, shelves of acorn-cap cups, a hearth of bricks stolen from the house chimney, a library of bark tablets bound with sinew. On every surface they had scratched their true history. The largest tablet, propped like an altar, told of the night Ezekiel's heart burst in the cornfield and the eldest daughters dragged his body inside to keep the bargain they had made with the thing that wears his face now. They wrote of chaining the corpse upright in the darkest stall so its mouth could still speak commandments, of feeding it the weakest babies so the bloodline would grow strong on its own culls. Another tablet showed a circle of handprints in dried blood, each woman's name signed inside her print. Beneath, a single line repeated in fading charcoal: "When the door opens we will walk out together and the world will kneel to the pure." They had waited, generation after generation, practicing the words like a prayer, braiding nooses from their own hair in case the world refused to kneel. The final entry, scratched only days ago by the tremor of a dying hand, read, "Someone is coming. She smells of sunlight. We are ready." Clara's penlight found the final tablet wedged beneath a cradle made of rib bones, its surface blackened by smoke and something thicker. The words were burned in with a hot nail, letter by letter, by someone who knew this would be the last testament. We did not begin with Ezekiel. He only opened the door that was already waiting. In the first winter, when the girls clawed at the walls and screamed for their mother, something answered from beneath the barn floor. Not God. Not the devil either, not the one the preachers name. This was older, patient, a hunger that had worn Ezekiel's face in other centuries, in other tongues. It promised that if they fed it the imperfect fruit of their wombs, the ones with gills, the ones with too many hearts, then the perfect would be born at last, children who would never die, who would carry the pure seed out into a world that had forgotten how to look upon them without screaming. Every generation paid the tithe. They birthed on the altar of pews, cut the failures free with flint knives, and laid them still warm into the thing's mouth that opened in the dirt like a second door. In exchange it gave them strength to live without sun, milk that never soured, wombs that never emptied. It taught them the songs that sound like crying underwater. It promised the seal would break when the blood was finally thin enough to shine, when the last daughter was more vessel than woman. We are that daughter now. We are the cup and the wine. The ones who went before us braided their hair into the nooses so we would have rope when the time came. They kept Ezekiel's corpse walking so the world would fear the barn and leave it untouched. They waited, patient as roots, for the woman who smelled of sunlight and open sky. You have come, Clara. The door is open. The hunger has your name in its teeth. Come down from the loft. Come willingly. The pact needs one more generation born of an outsider's blood so the circle can finally close and the pure can inherit the earth. We have kept a place warm for you.